So how do you figure out your sound on a record? Well, it's going to take a lot of experimentation, a lot of time spent. You have to really invest yourself in it. And to be able to do that and not lose yourself in it, you kind of have to come up with some larger concepts. You have to have an idea of where you want your music to sort of land genre-wise. Or if you want to be genre bending, you need to know what genres you're bending. You need to have reference points. You need to be able to establish a starting place and develop from there, and be able to evaluate yourself along the way. If you're guiding yourself through the process on your own, especially trying to define your sound, figure out your sound, it's a really big task. And it's something that will change over time. It's something that will be slightly different song to song. I think that's what makes an interesting album, is having records, and on the album, records being one song. A record is one song. An album is a collection of records that show the various facets of your artistic personality, or the things that you want to talk about, or the melodies you want to experiment with, the genres you want to dabble in, and sort of having all those things in mind gives you a place to start. The only way to figure out your sound is to start the process of production and recording. So, in most cases, I would recommend that you have a song idea, have a lyric and a melody and a feeling and a rhythm in place before you take on the journey of making a record and figuring out your sound. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you have just an idea for one of those pieces, and you start the recording process, and you figure them out along the way. But getting back to defining your sound, figuring out your sound, you have to start the process, and you have to have things in mind, not just about genres or maybe what your influences are. Those are important. They're hugely important. But you have to decide where you want to go as an artist, in terms of, do you want to be simply a recording artist? Do you want to record and tour? Do you only really care about being in front of an audience? Because that also dictates. There's a difference between, if you just want to have an audience and be a performer, you don't necessarily have to make records that conform to some of the things that would dictate a more commercial opportunity. A lot of music is streamed now, and there's a lot of discussion with Spotify and some of these streaming services about skip rates and what holds people's attention, and what makes something interesting, and how it gets playlisted. Those are considerations. If you want to get a song on the radio, having something that's more than 3.5, 4 minutes at the max, that kind of excludes you from some of those opportunities. So there's a lot of things to consider. So projecting yourself out into the world and thinking about where it is you want to go as an artist really helps define how you can create your sound. Do you want to tour with a band? Do you want to play to tracks? There's definitely a difference in the way that I would make a record for someone that wanted to tour with a band versus someone that wanted to tour with tracks. Because there's just a different presentation going on, and I would want the record I'm making for the artist to I mean, first you have to put the song first and the production first, and make sure that the production is appropriate and accentuates and displays the power of the song. But when someone shows up to see the artist perform it, I really would hope that that the person that came to the show to see the performance would feel like they got what was familiar to them. That that it wasn't such a different interpretation or such a different experience that they didn't feel like the two things were related. But who knows? The thing is like, who knows? Maybe you don't. Maybe you want that. Maybe you want to have the ability to interpret the songs differently from the record for a performance. And that's, I mean, all of these things are their considerations. So how do you find your sound? It's a process, and you need to, once you've written a song, you need to make a document of the song, and then you need to what I call those a work tape. And then once you have a work tape, you begin to flesh it out. Add some other instrumentation to it. Add a drum pattern, and the way a kick drum sounds, or the type of snare drum you choose, and how much reverb or effect you put on it, how much space or not, the lack of space, how you present those things. Those are dictated sometimes by genre or the feeling you want to create, and what feels truthful and harmonious to how you perform. I like to think of finding your sound a bit like figuring out what your fashion sense is. You have to try on a lot of different things. You have to realize what colors work well for you, what cut, how something is fitted. And then, the thing is you do that in the store, or you shop online, and then you have to take it home and try it on again. And sometimes you even need to buy an outfit and wear it out into the world to understand. Like, you might like the idea of it, and you might think it looks good on you in the store at home, but then you get out in the world with it and you realize that it doesn't feel right, or you don't feel as yourself in it. I know from myself, I love getting dressed up in a suit and tie, but only at certain times, and it's not how I feel most comfortable. I like the feeling of doing it, but I wouldn't want to be dressed that way all the time. It feels like that's like a special, that's for special occasions. Sometimes because I want to feel a certain way about myself, and or it's the appropriate way to dress, And so figuring out your fashion sense is much like figuring out your sound. You have to try things on, and you have to figure out what colors work well together, what materials you're comfortable in, so that you can be your true self. And fashion changes, and how you feel about things will change over time. I mean, you may always wear a pair of jeans, but you might go from wearing t-shirts for a while and then switch over to collared shirts. Who knows? It just really depends. You might wear a hat or not wear a hat. So much in the same way that you try on a bunch of different clothes, you need to be able to experiment with your sound. Try different guitar sounds, something that has a lot of reverb on it, something that's distorted, something that's dry and very bright. Just experiment and try different things to see what fits with your voice or fits with the feeling of the song. How do you face the adversity of determining what you need to do to have a unique sound, while you're trying to discover what your sound is? the things that you need to avoid are copying things too literally in a genre or an artist that you are referencing or look to for inspiration. You need to realize that to become unique and stand apart, you really need to be your true self. And while you're experimenting and trying to find what your sound is, how do you have the confidence to say, if you've created a bunch of demos, or you have songs written in different styles or genres, what is the thing that says this is what your sound should be, and how do you approach that in a way where you don't have anxiety about it? Well, number one, you need to acknowledge that you're going to have anxiety about it. It's going to be a very difficult decision, and you may not get it right the first time, but you have to pick a direction. You have to make a choice, and then take it as far as you can to know if how suitable it is. It's like going back to picking your fashion. You might like the idea of it, and you try it on in the store and you like the way it looks, but then you actually may need to buy it and wear it out in the real world and just see how people maybe react or don't react to it, or how you feel. Is it comfortable? And how much of your true self are you when you dress up that way? And music is the same way. You need to put yourself out there. You need to experiment. You need to work towards some ideas, because it's the only way you're going to figure out what really stays and hangs around. I think the artists that are new artists, or that reinvent themselves or change their sound and do it successfully and become unique, or leaders in their genre, or they become the artists that other people are copying, almost always, I think in almost all the cases, the uniqueness of who they are as a creative individual comes through. And it's not, you don't get it right on every song on every album. There are the songs that really connect, the records that really connect. When you have a successful record, or some songs work for an artist, a lot of times you'll find that they move towards it, and then that starts to define them as an artist in their genre. Sometimes artists find success and then they move away from it because they don't want to be pigeonholed. They feel like that they have more to say. But in either case, they have sort of a little bit of proof of concept, things that work and don't work, what they enjoy performing. I know that I'm talking about the context of a successful or an artist and going out and performing and having an audience. And if you're starting out as an artist and you don't have an audience and you haven't made your first official record, it's like, well, how does that comparison apply? In the big picture, it doesn't, but it's the smaller parts of it that you need to commit to something. You need to create a sound, and you need to just sort of see how it feels. And you go out and perform it, even if you're just performing in front of very small audiences. You need to learn how to present yourself and present the music, and does it feel right? I think sometimes artists have the experience where they'll have a successful record, but the record doesn't really represent them, and it can kind of be a one-hit wonder, or they'll have a successful record that they don't want to play over and over again. They feel like the reason that maybe an audience shows up because of that one song isn't really who they are. And and so they need to go through a process of change. And so on a smaller level, a more isolated, private level, you kind of need to do some similar work to find that out, and it's going to take time and expense to get there, and you're gonna have failures along the way. There's gonna be mistakes made. You'll make choices. You'll make choices that don't turn out the way you'd hoped, but it's a process of gathering information, and you really need to experiment with that. And in the record making process, there's margin for error. There should be margin for error, I guess you could say, where you need to commit to an idea. You need to commit to a sound. You need to pick something so that you can move forward, so you have a way to look back, so you have a way to evaluate it. In the case of where you've written a bunch of songs and you have a handful of them demoed, but they all sound very different, well, maybe that's the kind of artist that you can be, but you've got to pick something to focus on and know how to move forward with. It really is a process of you've got to do the work and apply yourself, and then be able to step back and listen to it and share it with whoever you can, and sort of see. Oftentimes in the record making process, the songs that everyone's putting the most effort and hope into, they can suffer from all the expectation and focus that's put on them, because you get into a place where you're overthinking them, and then there'll be songs that no one's really watching that closely, and you're doing the work to complete the song and kind of get the vision around it, but it's maybe a song that is not viewed as like a single. And sometimes those songs surprise you the way that they turn out. They turn out to be really strong songs, strong records, because you're just kind of going with a feeling. Something I try to avoid, and some advice I would give, is that you need to be careful about what you're listening to in terms of current music that is maybe in the direction that you want to head, because you don't want to have too much side-by-side comparison. So that you're innovating and not copying. You of course need to understand your genre and what your contemporaries are doing, but it's more about an understanding as opposed to a side-by-side comparison and making that kind of an evaluation. You need to be informed so that you know what some of the instrument choices and the sound palettes that you would use to indicate a specific genre, but you don't want to, at least for me, I don't like to study it while I'm in the studio. I would do the work on the record I'm making, and then I'd take it out of the studio and I'd listen to it, and then I would listen to maybe other things that it reminded me of, or what I wanted it to sit beside, and be out of the creative environment and just sort of be in a more passive, sort of observing environment. So you need to be informed, but you need to be careful about the way you compare your work to other work. I think it's important to listen to a lot of different kinds of music and find inspiration in a lot of different things. Understand the way arrangements and structures work in different styles of music. It's important to listen to lots of different music for inspiration, and listen to what they're doing with structures and arrangements, and to be able to have different reference points and different influences that you can that you can bring into what it is that you're trying to do. Because in order to be unique and sort of stand apart, you need to assimilate all the things that you enjoy and find inspirational, and then fashion them towards the genre or sound that you choose for yourself to be working in. Because if you simply are trying to do what someone else has already done successfully, then you're sort of co-opting yourself. You're only being part of yourself because you're trying to fit yourself into something else into something that someone else has done. It's important to be able to understand what they've done, and to be able to think about the sounds that they used, and the instrumentation, but more as like an emotional and mental picture as opposed to a direct comparison. And I think it's important, if you're going to do that kind of listening, to not do it in the studio. I think that taking it out into the world and listening to it with different people in different environments it changes the context of the way you hear it. And even if you were to listen to a lot of songs in the same genre, you would hear that there are different approaches. There are different balances, volumes of the instrumentation, and the way the effects are built around the voice or the instrumentation, because everybody's looking for a unique personality. So you need to understand your genre and your palette of sounds, but then take all your inspirations and infuse them into that. And I think being informed about other styles of music, and the way that those structures work, and the instrument choices that they make, can help you demonstrate your unique personality and your influences. But it's also then you're putting a spin on maybe what the genre is that you're working in, as opposed to just copying something that already worked. I think that that's part of what's wrong with some of the record making environment, is people latch on to what is successful because they and try and copy that too much because they're afraid of not fitting in. You need to take risks and sort of set yourself apart, but be true to the genre. So be sure to have an understanding, but work a little bit in isolation as well, so that you're only focusing on your creative environment and your creative vibe to bring about something new than unique to you, and then evaluate it outside of the creative space and think about it outside of the recording environment, and then take those thought processes back in and revise the work and carry it forward, to determine what becomes a unique sound.